This ID doesn't prove anything, and frankly, you don't look disabled. The woman's voice cut through the quiet hum of the tax office. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. The older man in the worn army jacket just stood there, holding out the envelope she had already pushed back. Behind him, no one said a word. Someone cleared their throat. A chair squeaked, but no one stood up. She tapped her keyboard, annoyed. "We need real documentation if you want free property." His fingers tightened around the envelope. A dog tag chain peeked out from his wallet, but he didn't show it. He lowered his head and stepped aside slowly. "If you believe no one should be treated this way, type the word honor below. Your voice matters more than you think." The old man didn't ask for a seat. He moved slowly to a plastic chair against the wall, one of those bolted-down government seats with cracks in the padding. His knee clicked as he lowered himself. He set the envelope carefully on his lap and stared ahead. The room moved on without him. The next number flashed on the digital screen. A young woman in yoga pants walked briskly to the counter. "Here for my vehicle tags," she chirped. The same clerk who had dismissed him earlier smiled brightly. He watched in silence. On his knee, a military-issue patch was barely visible, stitched into the side of his canvas bag. It was frayed at the edges, faded from time and sun. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. No one was. A boy near the water dispenser kept glancing at him. His mother gently turned the child's head away and handed him a tablet. The old man shifted slightly. A deep breath in, then out. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He had seen worse than this. But the quiet hurt more. Years ago, he had stood in lines like this to get rations. Years ago, he had walked with a cane for 6 months before the VA even looked at his leg. And now, apparently, his paperwork wasn't enough. He pulled the envelope back into his hands and opened it. Inside were 3 sheets. A notarized letter confirming his injury classification, a discharge certificate with 4 bronze campaign stars, and a signed affidavit confirming he met the state's exemption criteria for disabled veterans. They hadn't even read it. He placed the documents neatly back into the envelope, pressed the edges closed, and waited. The number screen ticked again. Beep. Next. Another face. Another transaction. He wasn't called. On the wall, a poster hung crooked. "Serving our veterans starts with respect." He looked at it for a long time. A staff member passed by, pushing a cart of folders. She didn't make eye contact. Another clerk in a blue polo shirt glanced at him, then turned to his computer with a smirk. "Some people think being old is a disability," he muttered under his breath. The old man heard it, but he didn't move. He just adjusted the envelope on his lap and folded his hands. He touched the inside of his jacket pocket. Something small and cold. A folded card. It had been laminated so many times the edges were rounded smooth. Not a government ID, not a certificate. Just a handwritten note from a lieutenant dated 1971. "He carried me out under fire. If he's asking for help, give it." He had never used it before, and he wouldn't start now. The woman from earlier walked past again, laughing with a coworker. They didn't look at him. He sat straighter, looked forward, waited. The building's air conditioner rattled in the ceiling. Somewhere a phone rang and rang again, unanswered. A young man 2 chairs down glanced at the veteran, then at his phone, then back again. He nudged the woman beside him and whispered something. She didn't respond, just gave the old man a quick, uncomfortable glance and looked away. A few feet from the front desk, someone pulled out their phone and started recording. Not him, just the room. The quiet awkwardness. The camera caught the veteran's stillness like it was part of the furniture. He didn't blink, didn't shift, just waited. Then a low voice broke the air. "He's been sitting there forever," a man muttered behind the desk. Another answered, "Probably trying to get free housing or some tax break, that's all they want." The veteran heard every word. He turned slightly, his shoulder moving first, followed by the rest of his body. Not fast, never fast anymore. He looked directly at the bulletin board near the service desk. Not at them, just at the board. Pinned to it was a laminated sign. "Veterans served with honor, let us return the favor." It was sun-bleached and curling at the edges. He stood up, slowly. The click in his knee again, the slight sway as he caught his balance. His left hand trembled slightly, and he steadied it with the right. He walked to the counter, Not to the clerk who had dismissed him, but to the far end where a pile of scattered papers had blown off the desk onto the floor. He bent down, not easy, not fast, and picked up a crumpled sheet of official letterhead. Someone's notice of license suspension. He placed it gently on the clerk's desk without a word. She didn't even look up. Then he stepped back, turned around, walked to the entrance doors. But he didn't leave. He stood at the threshold, half in sunlight, half in shade, and from his wallet he pulled a single worn card, not the laminated one from the lieutenant. A different one. It was a hospital tag, still punched with a small hole at the top from where it had once hung on his wrist. His name, his rank, a barcode, and the words, left leg, below knee. He stared at it for a moment, then folded it in half and tucked it inside the envelope. A small boy, the same one from before, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, is that a soldier?" His voice was too loud for the quiet. Everyone heard it. The mother froze. The veteran looked over and gave the boy the smallest nod. Not a smile, just acknowledgement. The mother didn't answer. She pulled the boy closer and said, too softly, "Don't point, sweetheart." The veteran looked away. Behind the desk, the young man in the blue polo rolled his eyes and said louder than necessary, "If I had $1 for every hero who shows up wanting handouts." He didn't finish the sentence, because at that moment the envelope the veteran held fell. It landed flat on the tile floor. The sound was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it made people turn, and no one moved to pick it up. He bent to retrieve it himself, painfully, silently, then stood tall again, still invisible. But this time, he looked toward the door and walked out. The doors closed behind him with a gentle swoosh. Outside, the sun pressed down on the sidewalk. Harsh light, dry air. The veteran stood still just beyond the glass wall, his figure casting a long shadow across the tiled floor inside. No one followed him. No one called his name. No one asked if he was okay. He moved slowly to a nearby bench, the kind with peeling paint and rusted bolts anchoring it into concrete. He didn't sit. He just rested his hand on the top rail, breathing. A receptionist inside whispered to another staff member. He didn't even say anything. "No one made him leave," came the reply. The words floated, weightless. Inside, the boy with the tablet stood again. "Mom, he dropped something." "No, honey, he just walked out." "No, look." She followed his gaze. Near the bench outside, something small lay in the sunlight. A paper, white, folded. The veteran hadn't noticed. He turned to leave. One step, then another. The paper moved slightly in the wind. The boy watched it. No one else did. At the edge of the lot, the veteran passed a municipal worker watering hedges. The man nodded politely. The veteran nodded back. Not a word. Then he stopped. On the low brick wall nearby, a laminated sign had fallen. One of those City Honors Veterans, Property Tax Support Available banners. It lay half-curled behind a bush. He looked at it for a long moment, then with effort bent to pick it up. His back cracked, his leg tensed, but he picked it up. He didn't call anyone, didn't ask for thanks. He walked back to the wall, wiped the dirt off with his sleeve, and clipped the sign back into place with a cable tie that was still hanging there, unused. He straightened it carefully, leveled it by eye, and then turned to leave once again. Inside the office, the front desk buzzed with the next ticket number. Beep, next customer. No one mentioned the man who had just left. No one noticed the boy still watching the door. The clerk from earlier reached for her coffee and accidentally knocked a stack of receipts to the floor. As she crouched to pick them up, something caught her attention near the edge of the glass. A reflection. The man, his back turned now, walking slowly across the parking lot, his envelope tucked under one arm, his gait uneven but steady, and the sign beside the bush. Fixed. She frowned. "What's that?" She asked no one in particular. No one answered. Outside, the veteran reached his truck. It was old, faded green paint. A U.S. Army bumper sticker nearly worn away. One of the back tires looked soft. He opened the door, tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat, and paused. He looked back at the building, at the bench, at the entrance. Nothing had changed. Not yet. Then he reached into his glove box and pulled out something small. A cloth patch carefully folded in plastic wrap. He held it between his fingers. The threads were loose, the color dulled. It read, 82nd Airborne, all the way. He nodded once, placed it in his jacket pocket, started the engine, and drove away. That was all. No confrontation, no demands, no raised voice. Just a small, quiet act of care for a city that had forgotten how to see him. But someone had seen, and by the next morning, someone else would return to that bench. The next morning, the air was colder. A thin layer of dew had settled over the city, coating windshields, sidewalks, and the edges of the same bench outside the tax office. Inside, things were as routine as ever. Keyboard clicks. Beep. Next number. Small talk between employees about coffee and weekend plans. No one mentioned the man from the day before. But he was about to come back, not in person, but in presence. At 9:12 a.m., a woman entered. Not elderly, not young. Late 50s, perhaps. Dark gray slacks, a long navy blue coat. Her hair was neatly pulled back. She wore no visible badge, but everyone behind the counter recognized her immediately. Her name was Elaine Mercer, Director of Public Services. She didn't go to the front of the line. She didn't announce herself. She walked directly to the counter where the same clerk from yesterday sat, sipping from a travel mug. "Good morning," Elaine said softly. "May I speak with you in private?" The clerk blinked, looked around, and nodded quickly. They stepped into a side office. No one dared to follow. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When they emerged, the clerk looked pale. Elaine held a folder in her hand, one of the city's tax exemption packets. Inside it, an envelope, slightly wrinkled, with a thin crease at the top where it had been clutched too tightly. She placed it on the main desk, tapped it once. Then she said calmly and clearly, "This was denied yesterday. That was a mistake." The room went quiet. Even the humming lights overhead seemed to dim. Elaine looked at the other staff. "His name is Raymond Joseph Tully," she continued. "Staff Sergeant, 82nd Airborne, combat veteran, injured in active duty, decorated 3 times. She opened the folder. "And he provided this." She lifted a small folded hospital band, as proof only when the official record failed him. She turned the tag in her fingers. No one should ever be asked to prove pain. And no one who's carried the weight of this country should be treated like they're asking for charity. The room held its breath. From behind the waiting line, the boy from yesterday sat again, this time with a drawing in his lap. He tugged his mother's sleeve. "That's the man's name," he whispered. "I heard it yesterday." She didn't shush him this time. She listened. Elaine walked to the bulletin board and removed the crooked veterans poster. Then she turned back to the room. "We're going to fix this." She returned to her office that afternoon and sent an internal memo to all municipal offices. Effective immediately, all veteran service interactions will be recorded and reviewed weekly. Any dismissal based on appearance alone will be grounds for corrective action. She attached a note at the bottom. "We do not serve titles, we serve people." Meanwhile, across town, Raymond sat alone in his truck outside the local hardware store. He hadn't planned to return to the office. He didn't think it would matter. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Your exemption has been approved. A letter of acknowledgement is on its way. Thank you for what you carried. E.M." He read the message twice, then folded the phone into his hand, thumb pressing gently on the glass. He looked out the window. The clouds were breaking. And for the first time in a while, something felt lighter. If you believe dignity always finds its voice, even in silence, subscribe now. It's how we remember what must never be forgotten. The envelope arrived 2 days later. It wasn't a standard city letter. This one came by courier, hand-delivered, thicker paper, embossed seal. No return address, only a single line across the top. Office of Civic Recognition, City of Asheville. Raymond sat at his kitchen table, reading glasses perched low on his nose. The letter inside was short, typed, but personal. Staff Sergeant Raymond J. Tully, on behalf of the city you served, we acknowledge our failure to recognize the cost you already paid. Your exemption has been restored. In addition, we extend an invitation for you to join us in honoring veterans during this year's municipal ceremony. We would be privileged if you would raise the city flag. Respectfully, Elaine Mercer, Director of Public Services. He read it 3 times, then reached for his cup of coffee, cold now, and set the letter beside a dog tag that hadn't left his side in decades. He didn't smile. He just closed his eyes. 3 weeks later, the city square looked different. Rows of folding chairs, a small podium near the war memorial, a new bronze plaque covered with velvet, and a flagpole standing taller than the rest, reserved for one pair of hands. Raymond arrived in the early morning, not in uniform, not in a suit, just a pressed shirt, dark jacket, and his boonie hat folded under his arm. He didn't speak much, didn't ask questions, only nodded when guided toward the platform. People were already gathering, among them, the boy who had seen him in the waiting room. He held a small American flag in his hand. His mother stood beside him, quietly watching. Elaine met Raymond at the steps. She didn't extend her hand. She placed it over her heart instead. He returned the gesture. No words were exchanged. When the time came, Elaine stepped to the mic. There are men in this city whose names are not carved in stone, but whose lives built the ground we walk on. She turned to Raymond. And sometimes the most honorable ones carry their records in silence. He approached the flagpole, unfolded the flag, hooked it to the line with steady fingers. The rope whispered as it rose. Wind caught the fabric halfway up. It snapped once, clean and proud, and the crowd rose. Not because anyone asked, but because it felt right. There was no music, no applause, only the sound of wind brushing jackets and the soft breath of a city remembering something it had almost forgotten. A child whispered, "He was the one," from the office. Someone behind them nodded. Elaine stepped forward and handed Raymond a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside, the original exemption form, now stamped, sealed, and framed beneath glass. And behind it, the laminated card from his lieutenant. Somehow they had found it folded in the city records. He ran his hand across the glass. Not smiling, not crying, just still. He didn't say goodbye when he left. But as he walked through the crowd, people stepped aside with quiet reverence. A young man in a dress shirt removed his cap. An older woman reached out and touched Raymond's sleeve gently. The boy offered his flag. Raymond shook his head. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed something in the boy's hand. A cloth patch. 82nd Airborne. All the way. The boy held it like gold. As Raymond walked down the steps, someone began to hum the anthem. Low, wordless but strong. One by one, others joined. Not to perform, to honor. And though Raymond never turned around, he heard it. And that was enough. If you typed honor earlier, thank you. If you subscribed, welcome. And if this story moved you in any way, remember this. We stand together, even in silence. See you in the next one.